special meeting of the School Board of Charlotte County is hereby called to order. Here in Charlotte County, we will achieve our vision. I'm sorry, did I say something wrong? What did I say? July 31st. Thank you. That's why we have you here. I think I must have taken off my glasses too soon, but here in Charlotte County, we will achieve our vision of student success through our mission. We will provide an innovative educational environment that allows and inspires success for everyone. Please join us for the pledge to our flag, and I would love for the Charlotte Local Education Foundation to lead us in the pledge today, since we're going to be honoring you and presenting you with something today.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Let's see. Additions and corrections. Mr. Dr. Superintendent, sir.
That's it.
I'm so sorry.
I feel at home. We have no additions or corrections this evening.
Thank you. Reports. We have one. Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, we do. This evening, the Florida School Boards Association is presenting a very special donation, I guess I will say, to the Charlotte Local Education Foundation. And Mr. Swift, would you like to talk about this particular donation, being that it's coming from FSBA?
Each year at the National School Board Association meeting, most of the state organizations that belong for the delegate assembly bring little gifts or trinkets to pass out to all the other representatives from all across the country. And a couple of years ago, several of the executive directors got together and said, this is kind of silly. We're spending $1,500 or $2,000 to cart a whole bunch of stuff here to pass out to everybody that most people really don't want. And so in lieu of that, let's make donations to something in our home states. And FSBA this year asked me what I would, as president, what I would like to have the donation made to in my district. And I said the Charlotte Local Education Foundation. And on behalf of the Florida School Boards Association, I am very proud to present to Clef a check for $1,500, which will, go toward buying additional scholarships for our Take Stock in Children kids, and it has a more lasting impression than a bar of candy. Although this year Tennessee had the best gift, and everybody was running around grabbing them up off the table. There were little bottles of Jack Daniels, but that was about the only thing that they usually pass out that anybody has wanted. Although my baseball bat was a gift one year from a guy from Kentucky. But Mary Fred, if you'd like to come up, I'll be glad to present you with this token from the Florida School Boards Association, and I hope it can be used and used well.
I have my new president here with us, Chris Spears.
Chris?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all you do for kids.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, thank you. Is this on?
Yeah.
Thank you very much on behalf of Clef, and it will go towards another 8th grader getting in the program and getting them on their way to getting a 4-year scholarship to a Florida school. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any old business tonight?
No, we do not.
Okay, then before the public hearing, we're going to recess the regular board meeting and call the public hearing to order for purposes of the 2012-2013 tentative millage rates and the 2012-2013 tentative budget. Mr. Superintendent.
It's my pleasure to bring to the public hearing this evening the following millage rates. The recommendation is for the required local effort of 5.164 mils, the prior year funding adjustment of 0.0790 mils, discretionary operating millage of 0.748 mils, capital 1.500 mils, which gives us a district total of 7.4910 mils for this year. And we will be presenting as an information piece the tentative budget this evening.
Okay. Do we, now would be the time.
And now, Mr. Greiner, if it's all yours. In presenting this evening is our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Greg Greiner.
Welcome, Mr. Greiner. I know this is the first year you're up here presenting the budget,
Yes.
always having been in a support role in the past, so we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chairman, Dr. Whitaker, and members of the board. It's my privilege to present to you the fiscal year 2012-13 budget. For anybody in the audience that's interested, there are hard copies of the budget book that are available on the counter on there. They look like this. In addition, the budget can be accessed from the CCPS website. First thing we'd like to do is take a look at the millages that Dr. Whitaker just discussed. Hopefully y'all were able to access this on your iPads so that you can follow along. Proposed millage rate is for 7.491 mils, which is an increase of 0.147 mils, which amounts to a 2% rate increase. This equates to $14.70 per 100,000 of taxable value. Our total millage amounts to about $794.10 for somebody that has taxable value of the same amount of $100,000. There are really two categories of millages that are increasing. First is increase of 0.68 mils in the required local effort to 5.164 mils, and that's required to participate in the Florida Education Finance Program. The district's required to adopt that millage. As you can see on the chart, in the second column under required local effort, you can see that increase over the years from the red bar up towards that purple bar. As you can see, the majority of our increase is the result of the change in the required local effort from the state legislature. A lot of that is a function of the fact that taxable values have gone down and the amount that we're required to levy has gone up. The second part of the increase is the 0.079 mils for a prior period funding millage or funding adjustment millage. This is a millage that's required by law to provide for funding that a district expected to receive but didn't in prior years from the required local effort levies. The amount and timing of that particular levy is set by DOE in July, so we just found out July the 18th that we were going to be entitled to levy that, and that will result in $971,000 in non-recurring revenue being included in this year's general fund budget. The board really has no control over setting either of these two rates. In addition, we'll be levying discretionary local millage of 0.748 and capital improvement tax of 1.5 mils. And that remains the same as it has over the last 3 years. This chart shows the change or the decrease really in the gross taxable values in Charlotte County over the last 5 years. For the current year, the property values are scheduled to go down $621 million, or approximately 4.6%. This is actually the smallest drop that we've had in the last 5 years. Hopefully, we're approaching a bottom in those taxable value decreases.
Mr. Greiner, do you want to take questions as you go along, or do you prefer to give your presentation and then ask questions
Either way,
later?
whatever's
Okay.
The board pleases.
Back to the first page.
Okay.
We have the capital we had the millage in '07 as 2, and then went down to 175, and now 1.5. Could you explain to the audience why it's
basically
decreased?
The legislature chose to reduce the amount that the board could levy for capital purposes. Part of that came in the transfer into the general fund of required local effort and then critical needs, but they've left us in a position that we are able to levy less in capital millage than we were in 2007, 2008. So
Okay.
that
Yes.
rate has decreased over time.
Thank you.
And may I also just include this notation? Prior to the recession a number of years ago, the state also allocated capital funds to each district in the millions of dollars for a district the size of Charlotte. We no longer receive any money. We have zero money that comes from the state for capital needs, which includes our construction, our renovation, our maintenance and operations, our repairs, our furniture and fixtures. So without this money, we would have no money to repair, have furniture, do renovations, build Lemon Bay High School, do those kinds of things. So we no longer get any financial assistance from the state of Florida for capital.
Mr. Swift? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, that all went to charter schools. That's the money you're referring to?
Well, no, it actually dried up. The PICO, I'm talking about the PICO funds, it is now statewide about $55 million.
Right.
It used to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But all of that $55 million now goes to charter schools. Zero comes to the public schools.
Thank you.
Mr. Swift?
That was the point I wanted to make. And there is a group meeting, or I think they started yesterday, that's talking about alternatives to the PICO, Public Education Capital Outlay money that is created by the state as a mechanism, because it's hurting the university system just as badly as it's hurting K-12 education. With the decrease, that fund comes from the gross receipts tax on utilities, telephone primarily, and with the decrease in landline and the switch to wireless phone communication, there is no gross receipts tax on cell phone usage, so that tax has been dwindling to the point where I think we get about $100,000 and it goes straight through to the charter school, to Edison Collegiate.
Any other questions for Mr. Greiner at this time? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Back to taxable values, as we mentioned, we have decreased approximately 4.6% this year, but over the last 5 years, we've actually had a decline of 45% in the property values here in Charlotte County. What's the result of that change in the millage as well as the taxable values? As we go forward and look at the budgeted tax levies, we'll see that we're going to levy approximately $3.8 million less this year than we did last year. We're going to levy about $48 million less than we levied in the 2007-2008 year. What does this really amount to? When you look, as if we had levied the same amount over the last 5 years, the taxpayers of Charlotte County have saved $164.8 million in local taxes. Now let's take a further look at the general fund. Budgeted revenues and transfers in our general fund. As you see, the red bar is coming down, sloping down to a bottom there in the 2011-12 year. Fortunately, this year we're actually going to see a slight increase in budgeted revenues, as we're anticipating having about $5.9 million more in total revenues and transfers this coming year than we had in the prior year. You can't hardly see it, but there is a slight change when you look at the purple on the screen, but our transfers in Included in this year's budget is a one-time transfer of $2.8 million from special revenue sources. That'll be another source of non-recurring funds, just like we were talking about with the prior period adjustment.
What is the source of those funds this year?
That is coming from the special revenue for insurance and FEMA. We're making a transfer based on
Right.
the settlement on insurance. As you can see, the state significantly reduced their contribution to education funding here in Charlotte County in the 2009-2010 year. It's slowly climbing back up, but it's still below the 2008-2009 level. Our local revenues, the yellow bar, has continued to also give down. It still represents those 65% of our total general revenue and transfers. You can see a slight change in the mix going on between state and local dollars, and this is the result of the recession and the way it has impacted taxable values here in Charlotte County. Of the $77 million that we're going to levy in general fund taxes, $73 million of the total revenues will come from taxes out of the 77 local. So virtually everything we have locally is coming from property taxes. There are a few other miscellaneous items that make up that total. But those tax levies that we're including in that $73 million are required local effort, discretionary, and the prior period adjustment. Those are all general fund revenue items. Revenues in the general fund are in large part determined by the FEFP formula. One of the primary drivers of for the FEFP revenue is the number of FTE, or full-time equivalent students, that are in the district. Over the last 5 years, our unweighted FTE has declined by about 1,211 students, which is approximately a 6.9% decrease. As you can see, we appear to have pretty much stabilized over the last couple of years, and we're expecting only to change about 10 students from the past year, from prior year. In our FEFP budgeted revenue, which is basically the formula we're just talking about, you can see the changes that have occurred over the last 5 years. Over that period of time, approximately 85 to 90% of general fund revenues each year have been based on the FEFP formula. And after 4 years of declining FEFP revenue allocated under the state formula, the legislature actually increased funding some this year. As a result, we're scheduled to receive approximately $2.9 million more in FEFP revenue. As we mentioned earlier, we declined about 6.9% in FTE, but we've declined about 18.8% in the amount of revenue earned under the formula in that same period of time. As you can tell, based on the chart, we're going to receive about $24 million less in FEFP revenue this year than we did in the 2007-2008 year. As we move on to our appropriations, the total general fund appropriations, they continue to decline by another $3 million this year, even though our revenues are up. This year's budgeted appropriations are about $30 million less than they were in 2007-08. Based on the chart, it appears that we needed to make the most cuts in the 2009-10 year. However, due to our federal stimulus dollars, the chart truly doesn't reflect the timing of when our cuts actually had to occur. The next chart actually shows that we had a significant amount of stimulus monies in the 9, 10, 10, 11 year. We had about $21 million coming in during that time, which delayed when the cuts have had to occur in Charlotte County. This chart doesn't include any of the race to the top because those really aren't operating dollar revenues. As you're aware, the year we just finished, 11-12, was the year that we basically fell off the funding cliff and had to make about $14 million in budgetary reductions. As mentioned earlier, we're projecting an increase in revenues of 5.9, which reduced the amounts of cuts required to balance this year's budgets. However, we still had to cut $3 million. While the cuts have been significant, we've been able to manage those by the way that we've used our fund balance. Some years we've grown fund balance. Some years we've actually used fund balance to be able to reduce the amount of funding reductions that we had to make. Without the use of fund balance in 2008-9, the cuts would have been much deeper. As you look at the red bars on the chart, you see in the 2007-8, that was the year we knew things are changing. We saw those changing curve. We had a good fund balance going into that year, and we started trying to accumulate fund balance. In the following year, we had to use a significant amount of fund balance, approximately $6.6 million, because of the change in revenues available to the district, as we lost significant amounts of money in that year. But instead of having to make wholesale cuts, we were able to manage that somewhat by using fund balance. During the 2 years of the stimulus, we were able to add to our fund balance so that when we come into the 11-12 year, which we just finished, we once again were able to use some of that fund balance. We used about $8.8 million in last year's number. As you can see, we're not planning on using a whole lot of fund balance this year. We're going to use about roughly $1 million. However, we have significantly less budgeted fund balance going forward because we did use it last year. But what this really amounts to is we've got about $4 million in this budget that are really coming from non-recurring sources. The prior period adjustment, the transfer, and the use of fund balance. So we expect to continue to face budget challenges again in the 13-14 year.
Real quick, Greg.
Okay.
Percentage-wise, what is our fund balance going to be?
Right now, it's showing up at about 5.4%, I believe.
Good.
Yeah, we're a little bit over 5, and that was increased because when we got the prior period adjustment levy in and added that to the budget, it made things look a little bit better at that point.
Now, that's the unappropriated ending fund, right?
Unappropriated ending fund balance, yes. Okay. The overwhelming use of our operating resources go to paying our employees. Therefore, to balance the budgets over the years, we've had to reduce the number of employees from 2,498 in fiscal year 2007-2008 down to 2,135 this year. And that's the purple bar at the top. That's the total employees of the district. As you can see, this has been a continuous decline over time. The total is actually 363 positions during that period. As you can see, the change in the general fund in the 2009-10 appears to be quite large. This, once again, is somewhat of a distortion because of stimulus dollars. During the 9, 10, and 10, 11 year, approximately 220 positions were transferred to the Special Revenue RRA funds, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the majority of which of those were paraprofessionals. In the 2009-10, we actually reduced the number of pairs in the general fund by 184 positions. However, in the 2011-12, we actually increased the number of pairs by 124. You got a net loss of 60 over that period of time, but depending on when you show them in the general fund, it has a change there. In 11-12, we actually decreased the total number of positions by 131, even though in the general fund there were the 62 because of the return of the pairs. Over the last 5 years, we've eliminated 174 general fund classroom teaching positions. That's the red bars slowly going down. For this year, we eliminated 68 total positions, including 32 general fund classroom positions. When we look at our appropriations by object, approximately 84% of the general fund is spent on salaries and benefits. As you can see in most categories, by comparing the downward slope from the blue bar to the 2012 to the green bar coming down, you see that we've been able to reduce the cost in all the categories except for one, which is purchase services. While we made significant cuts in the 8-9 year for purchase services, you can see that the rising trend ever since. The reason for that trend, the reason we haven't been able to cut those dollars further, is that beginning in the 9-10 year, we began paying Edison Charter High School to operate the school. And each year since then, they've added an additional grade. This year, we expect those payments that have shown up as purchase services to be about $2 million. Now we're going to take a look by function groups dealing with our appropriation expenditures. The big group is in the yellow, and that's for direct classroom instruction. These are the 5,000 level functions, if you're familiar with the redback codings. Those are for teachers, paras, classroom materials, and supplies. That represents about 59.1% of our general fund appropriations. The next group, the blue chart, the blue bar, is for general support. Those are the 7,000 and 8,000 functions, which include things such as maintenance, transportation, operation of plants, school administration, central services. And that represents about 30.5% of next year's budget. And the last group is for instructional support, things such as pupil personnel, instructional and curriculum, media, professional development, and instructional technology. Those are the 6,000 functions and represent about 10.4% of the budget. As we move forward, we're going to move over to the capital funds. First thing we look at in capital, once again, is our capital improvement tax levies. Virtually all of our capital, as mentioned earlier, now come from CIT millage. As you're aware, we no longer receive any PICO dollars from the state. While the cuts in our general fund have been more painful due to the human element associated with them, the change in CIT levies actually have been more dramatic in that the taxes levied in 2012-13 will only generate $18.5 million compared to $44.9 million in 2007-2008. We're only going to generate 41% as much money as we did in the 7-8 year.
Mr. Greiner, though, didn't the 07-08 include our hurricane rebuilding? I mean, aren't there a lot of those funds in there or not?
No.
No.
This is only capital. That's
Oh,
open
yes,
special
yes,
revenue.
yes.
This is only your capital dollars.
That's right.
Okay.
There's a huge difference.
Basically, you have a decrease over that 5-year period of about $108 million that we have by the amount of taxes that we're collecting less than we would have based on the 2007-2008 when we had a higher millage rate and higher taxable values. These changes for the millage rate and taxable values have significant implications in our ability to fund the future capital needs of the school system. Yep. This was the tax levies that we were just talking about. As you see, the dramatic change from the bottom bar of 2007-2008 to the top 2012-13. When we look at the capital project appropriations, the major group is that for new construction. In 2000, as you can see, in 2010-11, there's a large green bar in construction, and that represents the bond proceeds, as that's the first year that they were in the budget. We actually sold them in May of 2010, but they show up in that 2010-11 budget and continue to show up in a smaller proportion going down. This current year, we only have about $4.6 million of those dollars left, which are part of the new construction appropriation, which is virtually all for Lemon Bay High School. Also, I want you to note the increase in transfers that began in the 2010-11. That is for the repayment of the bonds. The debt service transfer is approximately $4 million out of that number, about half of what's represented on that sheet. And based on the current tax levies of $18.45 million, the transfer for debt service amounts to about 21% of our expected capital revenues. A detailed listing of all the projects can be found in Section 8 of the budget book. For those that are interested in more information, Sections 5 through 8 of the budget book give you a detailed accounting of how we're going to spend our money based on a fund, account, function, and object basis. that concludes my presentation.
Questions for Mr. Greiner? Mr. Swift?
Not really a question, but I just want to compliment Mr. Greiner in your first time doing this. Is a bunch of different kinds of information than we've typically gotten in the formal presentations, and it's very much appreciated, and I know how much work you put into developing this, and I also appreciate the time you spent with me yesterday going over some other items in the budget to make sure I was up to speed on some of the finer points of school budgeting. But it points out that we're not out of the woods yet, and things are going to require some very diligent efforts in the future, and if we can make any inroads with the state on the budgeting process this year, it's going to be interesting to see. The state board is the first one out of the box with their budget recommendations, and that ought to be coming out in September or so, and then the governor after that, and then the legislature. But I think every district in the state's in the same place we are, so it's going to be hard.
Thank you. Mrs. Rendell?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Greiner. I appreciate your presentation, and I really like the graphs. They speak volumes. See, really, they are much more effective than words are. Really, just looking at, pick any one of these slides, and you can see how dramatically our funding has decreased, or how the property values have decreased, without even really saying too much at all. The graphs speak volumes. So I appreciate that. It really helps. Every year we do this, and there's still questions. It's a hard thing to. The Florida budget is a hard thing to grasp, for sure. And also, I know I've read and I've heard the superintendent say and other people say that this seems like it's going to be the last of the worst years. And I just kind of wonder if you agree with that.
Well, as we pointed out earlier.
And why?
As we pointed earlier, there was an uptick this year from the legislature in terms of the FEFP funding. And while it may not be as dramatic as we'd like for it to be, I would anticipate that we will continue to see additional increases in that funding. It's just what level that will be at, based on what the Economic Development Research Council does at the state level. There appears to be projected increases in state tax dollars.
Okay.
They've come in stronger this year than we're actually budgeted for the 11-12 year. Hopefully that will continue. I think they got more conservative after they missed it for several times to finally get it right for this session. And so if we see that change, and if we see some further stabilization in the local tax base, I think we're probably at the bottom. Maybe a little bit less on the tax side next year, but I would anticipate we will see more on the state revenue side going forward.
Thank you. That's promising.
Anything else for Mr. Greiner? I just wanted to say that I really found helpful. I agree with Mr. Swift. There's material that's been presented in this budget that we haven't seen in this form before, and it's very helpful. Specifically, what I appreciated was the Appendix A3 and all the way through, Appendix A7, because those codes have constantly been a source of confusion for many of us, and when we're looking through the budget time and again, those codes really are very helpful in knowing exactly what they cover and what they mean and what goes into them. The presentation you just gave us here, is that something that we're going to have available on the website for the public to view?
They can be put out there, yes.
Okay, can we make sure that we get that up in the morning?
Okay.
Anything else for Mr. Greiner? All right, thank you, sir. Are there any citizens who wish to address the board tonight on the budget? Any citizens? Okay. Do you want to make a comment before we close the public hearing?
No.
Or- Okay. Then, if there's no objection, I will close the public hearing and resume the regular meeting. Mr. Superintendent, do we have a recommended action?
I do, but if I could take superintendent's privilege just for a minute before we do that. Just want to remind the board, when we look at that 5.4 fund balance, we were determined to keep our fund balance at around that 5% level. Again, we're not completely out of the woods. We do know that because of the nature of the world economy, especially Europe, that while we are seeing a resurgence of the economy, especially here in Florida, that it wouldn't take much to tip that in the other direction. But specifically, I had discussions with each one of you individually as we were going through our budget reductions and proposed that we allow our fund balance to drop to 4.5, so we didn't have to take our arts and music programs back to a half of what they were, and have split art and music between our elementary schools. And we collectively agreed that that was a good thing to do for kids. It's back up to 5.4, but it's back up to 5.4 because of the millage, our ability to assess that 0.7 plus mil because of our lost revenue in recent years, and we are allowed to recoup that now. That is non-reoccurring.
Right.
We also transferred $2.8 million, is that correct, Greg? From our insurance fund, which was appropriate. It was paid to us to reimburse general fund revenues, and we did use that to soften the blow this year and not make even more cuts than we did. That also is non-reoccurring revenue. So from my eyes, I'm looking next year, we benefited from the governor's original proposal of an increase in $1 billion in education. The legislature acted on that. We received about $2.3 million of additional FEFP money that we had discretion over that we could spend this year. We have $2.8 million that we just spent this year on reoccurring funds, non-reoccurring funds from insurance. If we get another $1 billion next year, we get another $2.3 million that we can spend. All we're doing is replacing the non-reoccurring money. I just wanted everybody to understand that we can't go, yippee, we got this extra money, and put it into reoccurring commitments. We've done that slightly just because we didn't want to take even more draconian hits this year. But if we get a $2.3 million increase next year, it's just going to bring us back to where we are right now with our expenditures. Just need to be clear.
Can I get a recommended action?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Whitaker, could the sheet that you prepared that showed the breakdown of where the governor's $1 billion went, could we get a similar kind of sheet on where how the $2.3 million came in and how it didn't really cover everything that we lost in the previous year?
Okay, we can. Yeah, Greg and I can sit down and work on that. It's not quite as easy to follow because the governor's money was really pretty specific, and that 2.3 just got sort of poured into the pot. But we'll do what we can to show its impact.
Thank you.
All right, now can I get a recommended action?
Yes, you may. I would recommend to the board the following millage rates be adopted as presented. Required local effort of 5.164 mils, prior period funding adjustment of 0.0790 mils, the discretionary operating millage 0.748 mils, and capital 1.500 mils, bringing the district total millage to 7.4910 mils.
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt the 2012 proposed millage rates as delineated by the superintendent for a total district millage of 7.4910 mils. Board discussion. I have to say, it's such a challenge to continue to cut and cut and cut and cut. And our staff has done really good work at figuring out ways to make things do the best they can. But I am concerned about the long-term effects of one person doing 2, 3 jobs. I'm concerned about the long-term effects of not being able to give our employees raises. I know that we have cut the tax rates from time to time, and I know that we have, our budget is so much less than it once was, but I am very, very concerned about our employees. I'm compelled to say that. So there you have it, okay?
May I respond
You may.
briefly?
Yep.
I share your concern. I hear it. I see it. And here's where our community members, those who listen to this or watch this video online, can begin to help us and support us. While we're not given any new truly major initiatives this year, the last 3 years the state legislature has poured new work after new work after new work, while we have decreased by 15% the people that we have to do the work. And right now, as we look between now and 2014, we have to develop, roll out, provide training for a brand new comprehensive teacher performance appraisal system, a principal appraisal system, and while we're working on that, we're doing district positions as well in that appraisal system. Create the assessments for and transition to the next generation standards at the secondary level while we implement the Common Core at the elementary level, and then move into the Common Core at the high school level and rewrite the final exams for those same courses that we're now writing final exams for the next generation standards. We have Race to the Top that we need to comply with, which includes much of what I just said, but there are time frames, reports that have to be submitted, modifications, budget amendments, all those kinds of things. And what we try to do in this district is be a buffer between the state DOE and legislature and our classrooms. So we try to take the work hit at the district level to the greatest degree possible, with 15% fewer people to do all of that work. Now, mind you, they didn't take anything off of our plate. We still have that myriad of stuff that we do in education, much of which really doesn't affect student learning. But we do it anyway because our culture has told us we need to feed our kids, we need to counsel our kids, we need to the list, you've seen the list. It's pages and pages and pages long, the things that we do. So I share your concern. And what I'm saying out in the community is when you talk to the legislators, I'm less interested in asking for more money than I am relief from their mandates. I've shared with our legislators, Mr. Swift has shared with our legislators, a 89-page document that lists all of the reports we have to submit every year. And there are hundreds of reports that we submit. And I would propose to you that few of those reports are actually read by anybody. Most of them are simply checked off as having been received. There is significant relief that could be given to the school districts in the state of Florida by decreasing the state's control. And what's good for business is good for the public sector as well. Less government control gives us, and I'm not talking about less accountability, I'm talking about less control. Two very different things. Less government control gives us the latitude to be creative and innovative and effective in the solutions that we apply. Florida also has a tendency to control based on the most problem districts. It's like, a parent who has 4 kids and one's a problem kid, so all the rules that are made for the family apply to everybody because of the problem child. Well, that's how our state legislature works. And I'm not speaking out of school. The legislators will tell you that. They legislate to the problem districts and make everybody comply. It's time to move off of that. And so I'm asking our community, our business leaders, our voters to put pressure on our legislators to take the requirements off. Not the accountability standards, but the requirements for how we do business, how many reports we have, and the many things that we're required to do that do not impact teaching and learning in the classroom. I'm done.
Any other board discussion? All right. The motion is to adopt the 2012 proposed millage rates. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries unanimously. New business, the consent agenda. Mr. Superintendent.
I'm requesting board approval of the consent agenda as presented
We
to you
have to
this
do the
evening.
budget.
We
We
have
have to
to
do
adopt
item
the
2, the
budget.
budget. Accept the budget.
Oh, gosh, thank you.
What's
Yes, we
that?
sure do. We approved the proposed millage rates, but we haven't approved the proposed tentative budget.
Okay.
So I will accept a
you got
recommendation.
It
Thank
is
you.
a-
There is a number 2 there. I'll accept a recommendation for the adoption of the 2012 tentative budget.
And I will recommend board approval of the 2012-2013 tentative budget. Final
moved.
budget comes in September.
So moved.
All right, I have 2
Oh,
motions.
second.
Thank you.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the 2012-2013 tentative budget as presented. Mr. Swift.
I just wanted to make a comment for those in the public. Between now and the September final budget approval, some of these numbers are going to change based on where the end of the year balances actually, because they're estimates at this point in time, and where they actually come in at the hard and fast numbers for the end of the year are going to adjust some of these things a little bit, but maybe not a whole heck of a lot, but may, if we're lucky, we'll be able to shift a few extra dollars into the contingency fund and just set ourselves up a little bit better for next year.
Any other comments from board members? Mrs. Rendell.
I would like to thank the Budget Advisory Committee for once again, last year I think was their first year that we received their recommendations, and this year they've spent hours and hours and hours. I know there are a couple committee members in the audience who have spent, I don't have to tell you how long I think it's over a period of many, many weeks that you collect information, have presentations from different people, and come up with your recommendations to the superintendents that are fair and equitable for all employees as much as possible. And I know that your recommendations weigh heavy with us. We really take them into account when we make our decisions and we have our meeting with the superintendent. It's one of the best things I think that has ever happened to Charlotte County's budget system is the Budget Advisory Committee, and it's a very important committee, and you do excellent work, and I for one, I'm sure I speak for the board, really appreciate what you do for the whole budget system process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rundle, for saying that, because, yes, I know you speak for me, and I saw some other heads shaking. The implementation of the process, which includes and created the Budget Advisory Committee, has made these cuts slightly more bearable, because we know that everyone has had input into how that process is going to work and those items. And while the final decisions weren't always 100% brought forth, most of them were to a large degree. And you guys are the ones out there every day implementing things, so you guys are the ones who know where the best way to accommodate the needs of those budget cuts. So you did speak for me, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
There's no question in my mind that we were smarter with our recommendations for cuts, especially this year, because we really learned from the first year.
Mm-hmm.
But we looked at every single part of the budget, and we were grabbing $5,000 here and $10,000 there and $500,000 over here. But it helped us avoid even more draconian cuts because we were able to spread it out so widely across the budget rather than just hitting 2 or 3 areas and taking it all from those areas. And I know the cuts we made hurt, but we ended up actually cutting about $4.6 million out of the actual budget. Our target was 5.4. We were able to cover some of the other at the end. But if you remember last year, we were looking at an additional $10 million cut for this year, which we were able to avoid because of a number of reasons, saving money during the year and so on and so forth. But taking that $4.8 million and spreading it out prevented us really from cutting even more positions and laying people off.
Yeah.
So it was good work.
Mr. Swift?
I also, I don't think there are many districts in Florida that use a process that is as broad-based and comprehensive as we do in trying to get additional input. I look forward next year to your Citizens Advisory Committee having more of an input in this process, because they did not come together until after some of these decisions were made, but they'll be here through the entire year and will have the opportunity to have greater input, and I think that will also aid in our process. And as I said, I don't know many districts that are willing or able to involve this kind of input, and I think it says a lot for our people that they're willing to participate, and it makes a difficult situation a little bit more palatable, I think, but not. I agree with the comments that Mrs. Messina made earlier. We can only continue to go so far, or as we've been doing with our people, and expect at some point in time the state's going to have to realize that they cannot expect student achievement to improve when they are dealing with their employees in the manner in which they're dealing with them, and expect that continued excellence in performance. It's just not psychologically going to happen.
Anything else? I wanted to mention 2 things, Mr. Greiner. The first one I have a question on. The prior period adjustment, that 0.790 millage, did I hear you say that came down from Tallahassee end of July? Right, and the reason I bring that up is because if anybody had our budget prior to that, and Mr. Swift made the comment that the next time they'll see slight adjustments as well, I wanted to point out that that would be an adjustment that wouldn't have been in the prior budget, Exactly, right. And so the tentative budget here reflects that, which would show some differences in numbers, just as in September, the numbers are going to be slightly changed as well because of nuances like that. Wanted to mention that. The other thing I wanted to mention, Mr. Greiner, you said, and I want to make sure I got my numbers correct, that since the 2007-8 year, because of the lowering of the property values and all the different things, that we have saved $164.8 million, or our budget is $168 million less than it would have been had the numbers remained constant, correct?
That's the cumulative tax savings.
Cumulative tax savings, yes. But if I look at the figure, $164.8 million as a cumulative tax savings, that's greater than the general fund budgeted revenues and transfers for any 1 year. So the cumulative savings is greater than 1 year's operating budget. And think about that. That's substantial. So I appreciate you giving me that figure because it really gave me some perspective on how much has been saved. Anything else? All right, then we are voting on the approval of the 2012-2013 tentative budget. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now we shall move on to the consent agenda as presented. Mr. Superintendent.
And again, I'm pleased to bring to you a recommendation to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda as presented. Any board discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? And that motion carries unanimously. The next item on the agenda, on the action agenda, and I want to pull it up here so I can make sure and have the language in front of me, is the resolution on high-stakes testing. Mr. Superintendent.
I'm pleased to bring to you this evening this resolution and am recommending adoption of the Florida School Boards Association's resolution on high-stakes testing by the School Board of Charlotte County.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that we, I'm sorry, did you say approve or adopt?
Adopt.
Adopt the resolution on high-stakes testing originally written by the Florida School Boards Association. Is there any board discussion? Mr. Vincent.
Mine's more about what this isn't than what it is, because I got in a conversation not long ago about this, and the way it was said to me is, I hear you guys are having a vote because you don't like the FCAT. And just so everybody understands, this is not a resolution saying that we're opposed to testing as an evaluation tool, that we're opposed to testing to assess accountability. It's just an opposition to the depth of weight that has been given to this teeny tiny piece of what we do for kids. I just wanted to get that out there so everyone understands what it isn't.
Great, thank you. And sometimes when we do resolutions, we read the whole thing, and I don't necessarily want to read the whole thing here today, but I would like to point out, based on your comment, the be it resolved clause, because this is what we're asking. Be it resolved that the Florida School Boards Association, which will end up being the Charlotte County School Board, calls on the governor, Florida legislature, and State Board of Education to contract with a qualified independent entity to conduct a thorough and fully transparent independent review and evaluation of Florida's accountability system, including the assessment instruments, contracts with vendors, providers, state and local costs, the return on investment, and the overall quality, reliability, and validity of the system. Second, revise the accountability system to include data from multiple forms of assessment and limited standardized testing to more accurately reflect student learning gains and identify learning weaknesses. Third, eliminate the practice of using student performance on standardized tests as the primary basis for evaluating teacher, administrator, school, and district performance. Next, phase in any revisions to the accountability system in order to ensure adequate time for students, teachers, parents, and administrators to fully understand and adapt to the revisions, and ensure that students, teachers, schools, and districts are held harmless during the phase-in period. and ensure that Florida's accountability system is fully funded by the state, which goes to your comment earlier, and that school districts are held harmless from incurring any expenses related to the development of assessment instruments and the administration of assessment tests, including the expenses related to training, test security, and the hardware, software, and infrastructure necessary to administer the assessment tests. So we're not saying we don't want it. We're just saying make it valid and credible. Mr. Swift.
One of the things that was very clear in the discussion at the June meeting of the Florida School Boards Association was the total lack of distrust by school board members, administrators, and parents in the FCAT as a measurement of pretty much anything. And with all the problems that the FCAT has had over the years, DOE or the state board or whoever has never taken the step of assuring people that the test does measure what they're saying it measures. There was an article in the New York Times this weekend that somebody is calling into question the math assessment in the Texas version of the FCAT. That in and of itself calls into question the math assessment in the FCAT because the same company, Pearson Learning, designed both tests. And when I spoke to the State Board of Education a couple of weeks ago, their lack of understanding of our resolution, it was very plain that no more than two of them had read it. They'd only read what somebody had told them it said and not what it actually said. We get criticized for not operating like a business, but no business would create if you were creating a quality control mechanism in a manufacturing business, you would want to be sure that that mechanism, whatever it was, would produce the results that it was designed to, point out the flaws in your production system. While public education is not a production system, we've taken a single day, single event, single mechanism, test, and used it to judge everything from student performance, teacher performance, district performance, you name it. And the test designers even admit that was never the intent in the design of the test. We want to be accountable. I don't think there's a school board member in the state that doesn't want to be held accountable. They just want to make sure that whatever you're doing to achieve that accountability has some validity, some accuracy, some reliability, and is transparent. Pearson Learning has never done anything to be transparent about the development of the test. They have ignored public records requests for information that would help ensure the validity or some trust in the test. And that's what this resolution does. It's asking an independent body to gauge the entire accountability system and make sure it is what we want it to be. And I think all of us here believe in accountability. And I think our teachers believe in accountability. They just want to be sure that whatever's being used to measure that accountability is accurate. And I don't know why anybody would object to that, but those 7 folks on the state board seem to disagree.
Further board discussion. Mrs. Randall.
I think it's a lot broader than just FCAT.
It is, yeah.
It's, to me, it's deflecting from implementing real education reform in this country and in this state. So rather than do the hard work of what it takes to really turn our education system into a world-class education system in this country, we obsess with testing instead at every level, at state level, at local level, in every way. And if you read anything at all by Diane Ravitch, you can't help but realize that what we are doing in this country is so backward. When you look at countries like Finland, we always hold up, they give one standardized test to their kids in high school when they're ready to graduate. One standardized test. It's not about accountability to them. It's about responsibility to them. And they, for the last 10 years, they have been at the top of the list of every which way you grade it. Finland is number one in education, and they give a test to their high school kids, one standardized test. And look at what we do, and it's, to me, it's a way to get out of the hard work of real education reform. If everybody just keeps obsessing about testing, that way we don't have to look at the real issue, and that is to completely redo what we do in this country and this state. And so, of course, I am for anything that will free us from this overemphasis on testing, and I certainly will be voting for this resolution. I don't know how much it will help if all districts in the state pass the resolution, because ultimately it's going to be the parents, it's going to be businesses, it's going to be the citizenry that what will really matter to the legislature. What we say falls on deaf ears, even with our mandates. You know, every year we talk to our state legislatures. It really falls on deaf ears. The parents need to say, I'm fed up. The students, the businesses, saying this is bad for business. We can't, people want to know about our education system in this state, and they hear nothing but bad news about the FCAT. And until it starts affecting businesses, it's not going to happen. So it's great that we passed this, but it really needs to come from parents and businesses, or it's not going to.
Any more discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Personnel action. Mr. Superintendent.
I'm requesting board approval of the personnel action that's brought to you this evening.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the personnel action as presented. Any board discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And that motion carries unanimously. Next item, citizen comment. Mrs. Dow, do we have anyone who has submitted a request to speak? Any citizens who wish to speak before the board tonight? Is that a no? It's like an auction, Attorney comment, Mrs. Young, who, by the way, I just found out is one of Charlotte County's Dancing with the Stars this year. Our own Mrs. Young. So make your appointment. What is it, March?
March 1st.
March 1st. It's for a good cause.
Arts and Humanities Council. Thank you, but I don't have anything else.
Okay.
I'll be back to bug you about that as the months go on.
Start saving your money for those tickets. Okay. Board member comment. Mr. Swift.
He's done.
Are you sure you want to do that?
Okay, Mr. Vincent.
A couple of things. I was privileged last week to attend the National School Board Association Southern Region meeting in Biloxi, and we had a session one morning, a general session presented by a couple of the districts in the Mississippi coast about their experiences with Hurricane Katrina. And Mrs. Messina and I both had kind of the same reaction. Almost everything they said really hit home because it was us all over again. The struggles they had with FEMA, the struggles they had with their own state bureaucracy, that whatever. And it was, I got to speak to one of the presenters waiting for an airplane in Biloxi the next day, and she was a reporter from CNN, and she did one of the good things that came out of all this, all the problems we had with FEMA. She's covered some other disasters after, Katrina and others, and she said that they seem to have gotten their act together. That's comforting, that nobody would have to go with that kind of nonsense that we went through trying to get the things that we were due.
I hope we never have to find out.
Yeah, I don't want to do that again. The group of people that were there for this meeting and the sessions, I thought were the breakout sessions. Many of them were very, very good. A lot of them around the disaster theme, but a lot of them about accountability and moving forward, and how you challenge your school faculties to improve, or school districts. So it was a very productive meeting, and hopefully some of those people will end up as presenters at some of our FSBA meetings, because some of the messages they had would be very appropriate for Florida school boards to hear. And one last thing, our new president of the Florida School Boards Association, Joey Cadle, out of Orlando and Orange County. Her logo and theme this year is Florida Public Schools Deliver. I've got a few car magnets if anybody would like to stick one on their car, because Florida Public Schools are delivering, and that message is not getting out. We hear about the excellence of everything but our individual public schools and the tremendous job that they are doing. And hopefully these will be popping up all over the state. So thank you.
Thank you. I changed my mind. I'm going to go boy, girl, boy, girl. So, Mrs. Rendell.
I have said enough tonight. Thank you very much.
Mr. Vincent.
I said so much last week.
We know.
And I don't want to risk calling you
Dr.
Madam Doctor, Your Honor, that I'll just save it all for next time. Thank you.
I just had to do it. You understand?
And there will be payback.
Mrs. Miller.
No comment tonight.
All right. I just wanted to say year-round schools got off to a great start, so we're thrilled with that. And I know teachers report tomorrow for the first time this year, so we're excited about that. And for those of you who have been with me for these last 12 years, I have senior portraits tomorrow. My son is going to be a senior. I know, Carmel, you do too, right? So it's a big day. Senior portraits. We're moving right along through the school system here. Mr. Dr. Superintendent.
Mr. Vincent, you must be feeling a little bit better. I've got three things this evening. The first two, on a note of sadness, I report former school board member Carol Eliason, who served our district from 1992 to 1996, passed away on July 3rd in Williamsburg, Virginia, and our condolences go to her family and friends, and our appreciation for her years of service. Tragically, along those same lines, I'm saddened to report that on July 24th, our transportation department lost a very valuable employee. Robert Albach, a mechanic at the Punta Gorda facility, passed away very suddenly. Robert came to Charlotte County from Kentucky in 1989. He worked at several jobs before coming to Charlotte County Public Schools in July of 1995 as a mechanic's helper. Rob was a mechanic with 17 years of employment here in Charlotte County. He is survived by his wife, Leah, his high school sweetheart, and wife of 30 years, and his two children, a daughter, Heather, who lives in New Mexico, and a son, Robbie, who lives at home. Rob deeply and wholeheartedly loved and adored his family. He and his son just finished building a boat together. It took them 17 months. He was very active in his church, and he loved to fish as much as possible, especially with his family. Rob's family was everything to him. He was known for opening his home at Christmas time to anyone who needed a meal or who was alone for the holidays. He was a very generous person. Rob will be greatly missed by everyone at Transportation. His pleasant smile, his funny laughter, his cute jokes made everyone's day. He gave 150% every day and was always willing to go the extra mile. So our thoughts and prayers are with the family as they go through this very difficult time. Finally, on another note, I want to recognize the board as having received the Master Board distinction. It was awarded to the Charlotte County Public Schools by the Florida School Boards Association at the annual spring conference held in June in Tampa. The Charlotte County School District is one of only 35 school districts in Florida to currently hold this prestigious award. So congratulations on being a Master Board. Lots of training goes with that. So that's it for this evening.
Okay, and Mr. Swift, that means we've got to hang the plaque on our plaque wall over there.
I think we have several things that we need to be putting up.
Yes. All right, then if there is no further business to come before the board, meeting is adjourned.